Right, let's talk about KO. So I've got to say, out of all the Super Sam heroes, I'm definitely having the most fun with KO, right? So at this point, I've sort of tried them all. Rathe, Pleiades, the numbers you can push out with the Aura of Suspense. Definitely fun, cool, right? A Tough Nut if you just want to sort of switch off your brain, although there's some good packages and different brews that I've seen, right, for him. But RKO, he feels so rewarding to play and trying to meet the different conditions for all your different turns. So be it trying to blindside your opponents with a nice bully tactics near the end of the game just to close it out is definitely fun, right? Just scrape through those final bits of damage with your opponent not being able to do anything at all, right? Definitely the Cheeto namesake, or the usual numbers game where you have the potential to turn something to, again, that 6 base, plus then all the other buffs attached to it. And your opponent has to sort of think and play around what number this could get to. So that's the sort of assassin vibe, if you will. It's definitely fun with its own merits, or just even the whole life balancing act, right? Just getting a substantial lead above your opponent, and then even in this case, invalidating the hunter or hunted, right? And yeah, I can understand my opponent's reaction to being a 12 life ahead and their card not really doing anything other than just milling a few cards from my deck. It's a pretty unfortunate situation to be in, but altogether, he is just a lot of fun to me, right? Because he's a good mix of a few different playstyles that I very much enjoy without leaning too heavily in any sort of direction. So with that in mind, let's talk about what you can do, right? So building around a Vigor. Vigor is just really, really nice, right? So his boo trigger is to create a Vigor. So whenever the crowd boos you, you get a Vigor token at the start of your turn. So the next turn, if you're creating it on your turn, or your turn coming up if you create it on your opponent's turn, right, you get a resource. And then that resource goes a long way in a few different routes, right? So of course we can feed into KO's own ability and essentially make that a 1-card play, right? Because now it's only 3 resources and we're taking a hefty amount of blues. But altogether, what this means is we're looking for either a blue or a red to create some really good 1 to 3 card plays. Now, of course, the other factor that we do have is Tunic. So every 3 turns we'll have Tunic, and Tunic is therefore essentially Vigor, meaning we don't actually need to get that boo trigger to still then be able to create some of those strong plays. Plus, then having the brute big package of cards to fall back on, it definitely helps as well. So in terms of what we can do, right? Definitely my favorite way to claw or turn back is just having the Vigor ready and a Tunic charge, because then we can just pop them both and we can play a show of strength, a swing big, or a command and conquer. And that is definitely really, really nice in terms of trying to regain some tempo after giving our opponent our whole hand, right? So the fact that that's just on the table is definitely a really, really nice play. But we swap out that Tunic to a blue and we hit that nice 4 number that Kayo really wants to find. So a Vigor and a blue in this case means that we can either pump one of those big brute attacks or command and conquer through a villainous pose, since it does target any attack, or we can tack on a pummel, and that is definitely a nice 3-card play. Now, in terms of the actual small stuff that we want to make big with KO's actual ability, we have stuff like Mocking Blow and Offensive Behavior. So Mocking Blow comes with a boo trigger if we're managing our life carefully, otherwise Offensive Behavior just has a nice on hit, and then a way to gain a little stat buff by itself. So the fact that we can push cards like that as, at least small enough numbers that then we can make decently big, so Offensive Behavior, if it's procced, can be either a 3 or a 7, is definitely really, really nice. And again, these are just 2-card plays, right, off of that Vigor and Titanium Bubble, plus whatever we are actually sending. So yeah, Vigor definitely comes in a long way. In terms of the whole Assassin route, there's not too many cards for us to actually utilize. So Mischievous Meeps is probably the standout one because the on-hit is definitely decent, unless you run into a tactical Dash.io who decides to play the top card off their deck, so you steal their item rather than draw a card. I don't know if that's the most efficient thing to do, but that's what happens. So yeah, aside from Mischievous Meeps, there's no real small attacks for us to really pressure our opponent, try to bait that block and then go wide, right, in terms of, the old bait and switch of Assassin. So aside from that, it is really about just stretching that value, so either sending something big off of that brute package, or again, targeting some of these really good Reviled cards that come with some nice triggerable buffs, and then the ability to make their base a 6 and have a nice hefty stat line. Now, the other great play is, of course, Nimby. So Nimby off of a Vigor is beautiful by itself because that's just a 1-card 6, and what's better than a 1-card 6? So yeah, tack in your 3 blue Nimbies and, greed it, take 1 blue Nimbleism, maybe roll a Scab Skin here or there, and just have a nice on-demand 6. Again, centering on our Vigor generation, but it's not that hard at all to actually consistently get Vigor, again, especially when we have Tunic to fill in the gap. when we miss one of those triggers. The other big curiosity coming up is the fact that we don't know what his main weapon is. So we know Moment Makers for Pleiades. Now, I don't believe there's anything mentioned for Lyeth, and then we have Rock for Tough Nut. But for Kayo, the Underhanded cheat, in the Living Legend table, he's actually got a set of question marks, meaning that there is something in the works, and that definitely does intrigue me because he's not weak by any means. So he does sort of feel like if he gets a really solid weapon to go along with everything he's trying to do, he could definitely become a really powerful hero. So yeah, when we have some good old fun speculation, so I could perceivably see it called something like the Deceiver's Claw or the Cheater's Claw or something like that, right? Because that just makes sense. And makes sense that he still has a claw because that's the imagery, right? So yeah, some sort of take on Mandible Claw that then fits with the Reviled theme. So we have a few different options, A, B, and C. On hit, the crowd boos you. Pretty vanilla in the sense of what they could make, but still very, very decent, right? So just an on-hit weapon that gets you that vigor. If you get lucky on the Scab Skin roll, maybe you can then feed that into triggering, you know, one of those mocking blows or a big bully where you don't actually have the life advantage, but you still have had that boo trigger for the turn. Or B, if you control an attack with 6 or more power, this is Go Again. That one's probably where my money would be at the moment, right? So it's very similar to one of the triggers on the Cheater's Charm, but then it also then feeds into Mandible Claw and Go Again proc rather than being discard, control 6. At that point, it would have to be a reviled weapon, but I think that's sort of the design that would suit him most. Again, you still probably need that action point generation through Scab Skins to be able to use it effectively, but maybe then that also incentivizes taking some of those smaller attacks that do have Go Again, just so that you can follow it up with a cheeky weapon swing. Or C, if you've been booed this turn, this says Go Again, similar to the power one, but also a bit more reliant and restricted on, again, those health triggers or those additional cards that do allow us to boo. So yeah, those would be my guesses for his weapon, but very, very curious to see when we get it and what it does. Hopefully, expansion slot for, you know, Monarch 3, but we'll have to wait and see. Other than that, the other aspects for us to probably discuss are, of course, managing his life. So a lot of our boo triggers come from being ahead in life. So cards like Sigil of Solace and Fiddler's Green are beautiful cards to help us manage our life and try to make sure that we stay ahead of our opponent so that we can get some of those hefty boo triggers. But of course, it's always good to have a backup plan. So we have cards like Boos and Concealed Object as on-demand boos to, again, trigger or generate that vigor. So all of the boo wanting cards, right, although they have a boo trigger themselves, have that secondary clause of if you've been booed this turn. So through Boos or Concealed Object, not only do they set up a vigor for the next turn, but then they also allow us to trigger that extra clause on those cards. So yeah, they're definitely nice to have. Boos, especially since it's 2 turns of vigor, can definitely be nice because it's really about smoothing out his minimal plays, right, so to speak. So in the sense of how many cards can I give to block, and then still effectively do something with my turn. So by having that consistent vigor, then you have access to a great amount of just 2-card plays, and that's probably where you really want to sit with him, unless you're trying to really just race and beat down your opponent. Now, in terms of some other options, we have Fix the Match and Overturn the Result. Definitely a combo I like. You can also take Unexpected Backhand for some of the smaller matchups as a nice little bit of extra damage through Fix the Match, sort of a reviled Reckless Stampede. And then in terms of some finishes, we have Flex Strength, Rowdy Locals, and of course, Bully Tactics. So Flex Strength, if this has 6 or more, it gets +3. Rowdy Locals, if it's defended by an action card, gets +2. So both these cards can come in very, very useful near the end of a game as just that little extra push of damage, while also still maintaining our resources, right? Flex Strength is essentially a 6 for 9, which isn't horrible, again, especially when we throw Vigor into the mix, but more importantly, allows us to cycle those cards and play out a little bit more of that fatigue game. And then Rowdy Locals, as a bit of an easier to send option than Flex Strength. If our opponent has to block it, then we get that +2, and that can definitely be damning. It'll be a 4 for 8, essentially, which again hits those breakpoints and could chip through some nice damage to close out the game. And of course, Bully Tactics, what's better than just getting rid of all your opponent's block pieces, especially if you've exhausted all their equipment, and then just blindsiding the win, right? So I love to personally just stick this on outside interference because it's not the greatest red to have early on, but to close out a game is definitely nice. So outside interference, if I play 2 of them, I'll probably just try to cycle one away, right? And then use it as a Bully Tactics to close out the game. But in terms of other picks for outside interference, Mocking Blow Red and Big Bully, I'd rather have them in my inventory and on call as outside interference rather than having those extra reds in the deck, because again, I really want to smooth out the pitch bases. So although these are really powerful cards, they lose a lot of tempo if you can't manage your life effectively, right? You're not drawing your sigils or Fiddler's Green effectively, and your opponent's just getting a nice clean back and forth in. So to me, it is a lot nicer to have them sit in the inventory than be a red that could potentially just mess up what I'm trying to do, or effectively just be cards I throw away to blocking when they are really strong picks for outside interference. In terms of, again, finishing out the game with bully tactics, or for utility, just nice old switcheroo, right? If we need a block, or if I just want to discard to go a little bit wide, send Mandible Claws, then, you just discard outside interference, turn on Mandible Claws, pick a blue off the old switcheroo, send Mandible Claws, and then send something else, and that is still a pretty nice clean turn. Otherwise, of course, in terms of going wide, we always have Scab Skins at the back of our mind. So yeah, this is definitely something I don't utilize enough, right? Because I play a bit more cautiously. But if you're in a matchup that is definitely unfavorable, something like a Syndra, right, where it's just aggro back and forth, and you can't effectively manage your life, then it is definitely the right idea to roll the Scabbies and then just go that little bit wide back and forth. Maybe get the nice clean health switch, especially because in that sense, Mandible Claws, if you're sending it first, it does effectively sort of become something your opponent has to block, right? If there's only that amount of life between you. So if Mandible Claws could then turn on the mocking cards, that's fantastic to me. And then of course the other way to do it is rather than going into Kayo's ability, right? Sending say a mocking blow into a show of strength or something like that, where you do try to effectively bait with a small to big card, right? A card that you can make big and then have something to follow it up with. Or even in the sense of just trying to mislead your opponent, where again you roll Scabbies, you have say 3 cards in your hand and they think you're going to go a little bit wide, but then you flood the first card with Kayo's ability and you get that damage across. There's definitely some really nice different play lines that you can take. And again, that's where it becomes really rewarding to play and sort of learn how to tactically use everything at your disposal. But let's get into the deck of actually being playing for RKO. So this is currently the deck list that I'm running, right? So we'll start with, well, the equipment. Now, unfortunately, he's not the cheapest hero to run. He does seem like he has some dependables, if you will, right? Scab Skins, Scowling, Apex, they all offer a great deal of block and then some really functional effects. So Apex, definitely better than Tyrannical Rex, right? You're not going to be able to make much use out of Tyrannical Rex, right? Because basically all the big cards are red and we want to send them. So blocking out with them with Apex to get that might can definitely be really nice. And then of course it just being a nice 3-block. Scowling, of course, just to disable opponent's turn is fantastic. Then Scab Skins just being a nice hefty amount of block. And then a casual roll here or there when we're trying to go a little bit wide, or a Hail Mary, if you will, right? So in terms of outside interference, these are the cards that I have essentially stockpiled in my inventory, right? So Big Bully, Mocking Blow, depending on resources. So Big Bully, definitely really nice, but that 2 cost can be a little bit hefty. So although they feel sort of the same use case, right? Having a boo trigger and then a substantial bonus to their effective power. Big Bully, if we've got the resources, so essentially if we're sitting on 6, and then Mocking Blow, we're only sitting on 4, right? Or we are trying to, again, go wide, maybe go Mandible Claw, Mocking Blow, because in that sense, it does come out comparable, right? Big Bully would be a 12, and then Mocking Blow would be a 10 and a 3 for the same amount of resources, right? If we're throwing in the Mandible Claw. So yeah, definitely enough situational advantage there to have the choice between them. Again, Big Bully to close out the game, so only take 1 copy, right? We either have it or we don't. Other than that, the Intimidate doesn't really do a whole lot because we want to sort of force our opponent to block and slowly chip away with them, not leave them with a nice juicy hand to send back at us. Tear down the idols, I do like all the Revered matchups, but it's not super substantial. It is still a 3 for 7, Intimidate, so a little bit of value there in terms of maybe disrupting what they're doing. And then the on-hit against a Revered to discard is definitely really nice. But again, with that whole red factor, I don't know if I necessarily want to just push it in my deck. I think I'd rather just, again, have it on demand if the situation permits it. And then at least 1 copy of a blue. So again, if I just want to send something else in my hand and get a Mandible Swing in as well, I can do that. If I need to find a block, right, any of the cards are effective. But I do like the idea of having something for every occasion, just in case something arises, right? In terms of our inventory for our Arcane, we have Skullhorn and Gnawing Gloves and Spell-Free Leggings, but they're definitely a bit more optional. You can definitely get a lot of value out of Scab Skins, especially if you are greeting it and trying to use it to carry the game. And then also for Arcane, we've got Shelter from the Storm, so especially with Rune Chance, definitely helps out. Having those little pings. Erase Face, Syndra Hate, right? A little bit of Fang Disrupt, clearing their fealty. And then again for, the Warrior, the smaller matchups, Unexpected Backhand, that basically just takes the place of Overturn the Result, right? So that's our Clash card that we're searching out. And then just Fix a Match in general, finding blue and guaranteeing us a blue for an next turn. I do really like it, plus then the potential to get, the Clash procs off of it, so the Might tokens from Fix a Match, the Booze, so Vigor from Overturn the Results, or the little bit of chip damage from Unexpected Backhand. Now, in terms of the actual deck, let me organize it a bit more so we can go through things a little bit clearer. Right, so starting off, we have our high cost attacks, our low cost attacks, and then our utility cards. But the real sort of way to look at Kayo is around his golden number, which is 4 resources. What can you do with 4 resources? So even with these high cost attacks being 2 costs, so Command and Conquer, Show of Strength, Swing Big, Flex Strength, we can then tack on, 2 extra resources. And how can we effectively use those resources? So again, there's that Hail Mary, Scab Skins, Mandible Claw, decent attack, or tacking on, say, a Pummel, right? Definitely really nice. Or Prime the Crown, Villainous Pose. So these are some nice handy boo triggers, set up some vigor for another turn, and then again tack on that extra +4 in the red and a +2 as the blue. So we've got 4 essential +4 boos and then 2 blue +2 boos. Along with that, we do also have overturn the results and of course outside interference. Again, outside interference turning on Mandible Claw is definitely nice, right? You can sort of think of it in the perspective of adding 2 resources to your turn in terms of a cost, right? If you're going to swing with your Mandible Claw. But then again, it goes back to what exactly you're picking with outside interference. If you're taking Big Bully, you're probably just using all your resources into that. If you're taking something like Mocking Blow, maybe you can make it workable. Maybe, again, going a bit wider is a bit more advantageous. But in terms of our low-cost attacks, right? So we have a nice cohort of some zeros, so Mocking Blows, Offensive Behavior. Overcrowded in the pinch is also an okay attack, especially if you've generated Vigor or your opponents are a token-based hero, right? You can get some buffs on that. Again, still effectively use KO's ability with it, but most likely it's a blue you're cycling around or something you're sticking in your arsenal as a little bit extra defensive power, or just straight using it as a block when you do draw it. Then, of course, we also have our Mischievous Meeps, right? So this is a decently pressuring card. Again, the prospect of drawing off it is there, so your opponent might overblock it, block 6, and then you get some of those block pieces away to then go into something else, and you're feeling pretty happy with it, right? But that's not always going to work. It does come with that resource cost, and unfortunately the 2 block value attached to it, but still, it does feel decent enough. Now, Fix the Match is mainly there to find overturn the results, or again, depending on the matchup, unexpected backhand. So the fact that it guarantees a blue for our next turn is still something we can pump, right? We can make it into a 6 if need be. We have those extra resources. And then if your opponent is blocking it, you have the chance of getting those might tokens, maybe the boos off of overturn the result or the damage off of unexpected backhand. So yeah, I do think there is some nice enough outs to it to include a few copies, so 2 copies in this case. And then again, it's a yellow, so it still does comfortably feed into some of those other options for us to play. We don't have Vigor, we don't have Tunic. It can still feed into a Command and Conquer, a big swing, a swing big, or a show of strength. And then, of course, Nimby, right, fetches the blue Nimblism, of which we're only taking a singular copy. So we are pretty much breeding it, right? If this goes, if we have to block with this or play it, then that's a bit unfortunate, but it then does maximize our value, so to speak, right? So yeah, Nimby is just a 1-card 6 when we have a Vigor or a Tunic up. It's definitely nice by itself. Again, Scab Skins, maybe something else added to that turn can definitely be helpful. Now, the old switcheroo could probably be changed to like another booze or something, but it still has a decent utility effect, being a reversal on Clash, and there are a fair few Clash heroes in the current meta. It's still an attack that we can pump to a 6, right? Get a +4 off of Kano's ability, essentially. It's a 3 block, so I think there's enough merit to include 1 copy, but again, it could be swapped out to a booze. Booze still has that 3 block, and maybe we value the boo trigger a little bit more. And again, Rowdy Locals and our Flex Big, a little bit of extra damage near the end of the game, as well as a way, in the case of Flex Strength, to salvage some extra resources, right? Basically cycle stuff around, be a bit more fatigue resistant. And then in terms of utility, for managing our health, Fiddler's Green, Sigil of Solace, definitely some really nice inclusions, right? Fiddler's Green is just fantastic across the board. Definitely one of the stronger rares of later sets. Then defense reactions, 1 shelter and 2 sink blows. If I'm against Rune Chance or Arcane, I'll probably swap out the sink blows to 2 more copies of Shelter from the Storm. I've sort of built the deck with enough blues that you shouldn't need to sink a card to cycle it. You should be happy with most of your hands most of the time. But, if we don't need that extra damage prevention flexibility of Shelter, then it's nice enough, right, to have a few copies in there. But again, we've got several heroes with those minor breakpoints where a 3 block and then some extra value from those Shelter procs is definitely solid enough, right? Boos in 2 and 1 concealed object as our boo triggers on demand. Our concealed object, unfortunately, although it's a really nice card, has no block. So yeah, that takes its value a little bit down, but it's still useful enough, right? Especially with the fact that you can play it on your opponent's turn and get that Vigor trigger if you need that resource for your next turn. Is definitely nice. And then lastly, Steal Victory. Again, there's a fair few matchups where stealing one of their tokens is definitely nice enough. Otherwise, it's just a solid blue 3 block, which plays around, confidence and overpower a little bit. That does definitely come in handy. But there we go. That is the deck in a nutshell, right? So yeah, of course, I'll put the full deck list in the description. But who are you enjoying most when it comes to Super Slam? Let me know. Otherwise, hope you enjoy.